Now, however, going beyond Einstein, physics has also taught us that they're higher dimensions, or could be higher dimensions. Though this is all speculation, but and I'll just give a brief overview of this. It goes back to the 1920s when Kaluza and Klein said there could be a fifth dimension which unifies gravity and electromagnetism. Just as general relativity had given a geometrical interpretation to gravity, this gives a geometrical interpretation to electromagnetism and gravity and unifies them. But the extra dimension is compactified on the Planck scale, which is the smallest scale you can ever have in quantum gravity. It's 10 to the minus 33 centimeters. So obviously it's rather hard to envisage it, but the way you can look at this, you can think about our three extended dimensions being along the length of this cylinder, and the compactified extra dimension is wrapped up, so it's circular, and that's why you don't see it. It's too small to see. And if you look from a distance, of course, you don't even notice there. It's just like a fireman's hose. So you would think the world was purely three-dimensional. Well, Einstein quite liked that idea, but nevertheless people forgot about it for several decades because they were getting excited by quantum theory. But then in the 1980s, the idea was resurrected in the context of superstring theory, which said there are actually 6 compactified dimensions, so that you have 10 dimensions in total. And then there are different versions of superstring theory, but then in 1995, M-theory came along and amalgamated those theories and said, well, actually, you've got 11 dimensions, you have one more dimension. And so, in some sense, you can see the history of physics as being increasing from dimensionality from 3 dimensions to 4 dimensions to 5 to 10 to 6. And so, I've depicted this by this diagram here. Physics gives a sequence of paradigms with increasing dimensionality, going from Newton all the way up to M-theory. And there's one particular version I like. It's called the Randall-Sundrum picture, in which you regard the physical world as a 4-dimensional brain in a hard 5-dimensional bulk. In this case, one of the extra dimensions is stretched out and extended rather than being compactified. Now, of course, this is all hard to envisage. It's completely different from common sense reality, and I have to say that by no means all physicists accept this. There's still no direct evidence for these extra dimensions, but nevertheless, some of the brightest brains on the planet spend a lot of time thinking about this. So it's respectable physics, albeit controversial, and this is the price you pay for unification. Now I want to get back to the question of mind, but I want you to bear that in mind, the possibility that the universe has got extra dimensions. I now want to get on to the problem of time, because you remember my title is Making Space and Time for Mind. Now, there are 2 problems with time. The first is to do with the flow of time, and the second is to do with what's called the specious present. And philosophers are very familiar with these issues, but I want to say why I think they're so relevant here. Because the point is, this is where the link between physics and philosophy comes. The physics and the philosophy of mind comes, in my view, in understanding time. The problem with time is that in relativity, you have what's called the block universe. And in the block universe, we have an intuitive concept that, for example, our time is, if this is our brain, you have a sort of world line in space-time, and you think of your consciousness as being like a bead on a wire, which is following up the world line of your brain. That's what we mean by the passage of time. And we also have the impression that we can choose different futures. So I can decide to carry on talking, or I can decide to go and have a cup of tea or whatever. I can make a choice. So that's our intuitive feeling about the world. But the problem is that Einstein's block universe doesn't describe the flow of time at all. You have a block universe. And therefore, it seems fair to say that relativity merges space and time, but space-time is frozen. So there is no room for consciousness in the standard view of relativity. Nor is it clear that quantum theory is going to solve this problem. So what is the solution? And I'm going to focus on a solution which I like, though it's not the mainstream one. It came from a very eminent philosopher called C.D. Broad. And he said, well, maybe we need an extra dimension, which in some sense is associated with your mental time. And so you can imagine your four-dimensional space-times. You've got these different possible futures, but then as mental time goes on, you choose these different futures and you gradually, if you like, solidify what is a five-dimensional perspective. And this isn't a standard view of physics, and it's not even a standard view of philosophers, but nevertheless, this is the view I push for trying to explain the flow of time. And I told you about the brain cosmology. The thing about the brain cosmology is that you think about, I told you about the brain theory. In brain cosmology, you have to think of the brain as moving through this bulk, this fifth dimension. And I actually, in my own approach, associate brain cosmology with this extra dimension. Now, so what this is saying, though, this is a slightly complicated diagram, it's saying that you've got a sort of five-dimensional amalgamation of matter and mind. It's a psychophysical space, if you like, which I'm trying to represent here. So you've got your physical space and you've got your perceptual space, and they're orthogonal. And the claim is that by using this higher dimensional approach, that you can unify matter, phenomenal space and physical space. This is an idea which was pushed a great deal by a friend of mine called John Smithers, who sadly died about a year ago. But so far, I'm only talking about conventional physical space and our perception of physical space. That's what I mean by phenomenal space. But there are other mental spaces as well. I mean, there's dream space. We have our dreams, and they can be very realistic. They clearly seem to take part in a space, but my dreams are very vivid. I sometimes don't even know whether I'm dreaming. I hope I'm awake now. But anyway, Price was an Oxford philosopher. He proposed that physical events and mental events, dream events, exist in different space-times. We inhabit two worlds simultaneously, the world of common experience governed by physical laws, and another space quite as real, which obeys other laws. Continuous dream life goes on throughout our waking life, and occasionally we may catch a glimpse of it. So rather like the stars, we don't only see them at night, but they're still there. And in fact, C.D. Broad, who I referred to, he actually went further and he merges dream space and phenomenal space into a single space in more than three dimensions in which sensations of all kinds exist. Now, obviously this isn't the standard view, but these were both very eminent philosophers, so it's not completely crazy. But now, maybe I am going to be going completely crazy because I'm going to talk about more controversial type mental experiences, which many people, of course, wouldn't take seriously, but I personally do. But I'm just trying to stress the fact that our mental domain does go beyond our perception of the physical world and beyond even dreams. This is my table of mental spaces. I'll go through this quickly because it might annoy some of you, but you've got phenomenal space, memory space, visualization space, dream space. That's normal space. There are also spaces which I've described as paranormal, which I realize is going to annoy some people because there are many skeptics of this subject. This is involving so-called psychic experiences where you might see a ghost or experience strange physical phenomena. And then there are phenomena which might be described as spiritual. That's a rather taboo word, so I normally prefer the word transpersonal, referring to things like out-of-body experiences, near-death experiences, the possibility of survival after death, and mystical experiences. I realize these are controversial topics, but when I talk about mind, I have to confess, trying to accommodate those phenomena as well. But so the key point I get from this is that you actually need a space. Most of those experiences I talked about, even the controversial ones, they require some form of space and time. And this is Descartes, who of course we've heard a lot about. But it's not the usual space and time. And the idea is that I construct what I call a universal structure, which is like a higher dimensional reality structure which unifies physical, phenomenal, memory, dream space, and any other space you care to be interested in. And so we need a new paradigm, an extension of physics, if you like, which incorporates consciousness, transcendence of space and time, and mental phenomena in some radically new way. And so what I'm proposing is a sort of grand unified theory of matter and mind, which involves these higher dimensions, which I referred to. And these, remember, are higher dimensions that came from respectable physicists. And I'll try and depict this in this way. Let me just say mental experiences can be accommodated in a higher dimensional reality structure, reconciling our different experiences of the world. It has a hierarchical structure which incorporates physical space as well as non-physical parts, accessible only by our minds. So this was the picture I showed you originally on the right. This is just the conventional description of our experience of the physical world. Remember, this is how we merge our phenomenal and our physical experiences on the right there. But then the idea is we extend this to our non-physical experiences, be they dreams, out-of-body experiences or whatever, and one says there is then some higher dimensional structure which I've represented by a four-dimensional hypercube, which is in some sense, this is what I'm calling the universal structure. So and to put this on the final step is to identify that universal structure with the higher dimensional space of modern physics. You remember I showed this picture earlier. You have a higher dimensional space. Then you have to ask the question, well, if it's true that the physical world is a brain in a higher dimensional space, you've got to ask the question, what else is there in this bulk? And the only thing I'm aware of are my mental experiences. So in some sense, I'm identifying the higher dimensional space of Randall Sundrum picture, for example, with mental space. Now, I have to stress this is not the mainstream physics view at all. In fact, I'll probably be burnt at the stake as a heretic by most physicists. It certainly wouldn't be the view of most string theorists, who will probably be very annoyed at the concept of trying to identify their higher dimensional space with something like mental experience. In some sense, string theorists have enough trouble trying to convince physicists that their ideas are respectable physics rather than maths. So identifying it with something like consciousness or mental experience is even more taboo. So I just want to stress that. It's my own particular approach. And then I'll say something briefly. I think I must be coming to the end of my time, but let me say something about the specious present, because I think that's also crucial. The specious present is the sort of shortest time of which you can be aware. The idea goes back actually to 1882, a guy called Kelly. The present is really a part of the recent past, delusively being that bit, a time that intervenes between past and future. And then it was elaborated on by William James. The prototype of all conceived times is the specious present, the shortest duration of which we are immediately and incessantly sensible. And the point about this is there is a minimum time scale of experience. So that if for example, you imagine a light going around, you see the light going around, but if the light goes around more than about 10 times a second, you don't see a light going around, you just see a circle, because the specious present is longer than the time the light takes to go round. So we have a specious present, which is something like 1/10 of a second. But the point is, I think the question you have to ask, I mean, that specious present can vary. There are ordinary normal circumstances in which it varies. So, for example, if you're a trapeze artist in a circus, your specious present decreases. Time slows down so that you can catch the hands of the other person you're trying to catch. On the other hand, there's if you're a balance artist in a circus where you have to stand in the same position for a long time, your specious present increases. So it seems like 5 minutes to the outside, but it only seems like a short time to him. There can be more dramatic changes. If you have crisis, even a car crash or something, the specious present may decrease even more. You can be in a fever and it can be, the specious present can increase even more. So you see a flashing light, which turns out to be the rising and setting of the sun in the window. You can have more mystical experiences. There's a famous poem called Tea Time by Rupert Brooke, where time freezes when he's having a cup of tea with his lover. On the other hand, you can have apparent near-death experiences when you see your whole life instantly. So these are examples of where your specious time, your specious present appears to change. Now, obviously, you could say that change in specious present is something to do with what goes on in the brain, that there's a clock in the brain.